thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Good morning and welcome to the Weekly Review. I'm your host, Paul Hazard, and joining me this morning we have all the way from Portugal, Lucy Newberger, Christopher Bowles, and John Gibbs. Good morning to you all.
Good morning.
We have a super packed show this morning with 3 great stories, so you're not going to get the usual preamble from me. Just stay tuned. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. John Catt have an exceptional collection of book titles that cover a range of educational topics, ideas and research. The books are aimed at forward-thinking schools and support best practice teaching for both primary and secondary education. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
How can you show your students the opportunities that await them? How can you fuel their aspirations and motivate them to achieve? Futurum Careers provides a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. We help you to show your students what they can aim for and how. From articles to activity sheets, animations to podcasts, all our resources align with Gatsby benchmarks and are free for you and your students to download. Visit futurumcareers.com and subscribe today. Futurum Careers, helping teachers to inspire the next generation.
Welcome back, everybody. Our first story this morning is about homework, something of a thorny issue, with California thinking of joining other states and countries, France in particular, and banning homework. The context is they want to alleviate stress for pupils and parents, and the bill that's proposed in California would really address excessive and, interestingly, ill-designed homework. Now, this is my 40th year of teaching, and over that time, I've seen a lot of homework. I've seen a lot of homework brilliantly done. I've seen some of it poorly done. I've seen some homework and the motivation behind it is just to appease parents. I've seen other bits of homework done as a kind of a protective buffer for maybe potentially, not so good exam results or something. So, Lucy, you and I have talked about homework before. In your experience, really, what is the purpose of homework?
I mean, I'm coming at it from a primary level. So my view is that I think that at primary level, it's an unnecessary addition to a teacher's workload, to a child's workload. It's my big belief is that, and maybe again, this is the inner hippie in me coming out, as it invariably does in these shows, but children should be doing a little bit of reading, maybe sometimes tables practice occasionally if they can get around to that. But other than that, they should be going outside. They should be having dinner around the table. What a sort of wholesome image I'm trying to create here. And again, very idealistic, but that's the kind of thing I'm looking for as a primary teacher. I want them to be maybe practicing a few skills here and there, but do I want them sitting down and doing an hour or doing a worksheet that I actually don't want to mark? Not really, no. I think that they have better things to be doing with their time. At high school level, at secondary level, is it a slightly different beast? Probably, certainly with exams and everything else. But for me, at primary level, there's no need.
Yeah. Christopher, what is the impact of homework on childhood and family life, and does it really cause stress and distress?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I'm viewing it, of course, from the independent senior perspective, and I suppose the answer is it really depends how it is done and what it's for. I mean, homework has always been an imposition on our free time, really, hasn't it? My childhood, I remember, was structured around how much homework got set each night in quite an academically demanding school. I think we had about 2 hours a day each weekday evening when our school day finished at 3:45 in the evening, and it took an hour to get home on the bus. In retrospect, I think this homework burden was reasonable, but at the time it was incredibly difficult to fit around everything else: music lessons, choir rehearsals, religious commitments, sports commitments, scout camps, and just meeting your friends for pizza, trip to the bowling alley, do you remember those? Or a kickabout in the park. So, I mean, every school day evening really involved some kind of sacrifice for us. But I think these were sacrifices that we believed were worth it, because my Generation X peers, I think, believed in the prospect of a post-millennium world in which we would be playing an active, positive role in setting the rules ourselves. So I wish California well in its homework mission. I just hope they don't regret it a few years down the line.
Yeah. France, which has banned homework, started with a pilot, and I think after a couple of years, the pilot is now fully implemented. So yeah. I had some flashback there of roller discos and things like that, which is a little bit worrying. Yeah. John, undoubtedly there are rewards for children who get their homework done and get it well done. And, there is a penalty for children that don't get their homework done and well done. So there's an inequity there, undoubtedly. And, we talk a lot about the second site of acquisition, which really is the home, with school, being a primary site of learning. But homes are very different places. Nice middle-class homes where televisions and computers are turned off. The child has a lovely warm space to do their homework, is very different from the child who maybe had to deal with a parent who, had too much alcohol, is involved with drugs. So there's a huge inequity and unfairness with homework. And that cycle of privilege really perpetuates itself. What is the point of homework if it isn't that, to perpetuate that kind of unfairness?
Good question. I mean, the answer to that, in a way, is that we don't know. To be honest, there is inconclusive evidence about homework. And as Chris points out, California are conducting to some extent an experiment. We'll see where that goes. I suspect it will be fine. And the reason for that is because, well, one thing actually jumped to what you said, Paul, is that what the evidence does show, yes, it advantages kids with advantages. So the kids with advantages are advantaged by homework. That is true. And it tends to be that the winners tend to look back at their school days and go, well, the homework did me no harm because, nothing did you any harm. You succeeded, you won. In the game that we're playing with our students, the winners tend to look back and the rules they abided by worked out for them. It doesn't work out for a lot. I think it causes stress, it causes anxiety. It certainly advantages some over others. Society will do that. You can't rule out every kind of advantage. My view is, with Lucy, that play, fun, even staring out the window idly is part of childhood. Dreaming, thinking, playing, all of those things get pushed aside by homework, especially homework that's badly set. The kind of homework. I was very rude about PE teachers last week. I apologize. It isn't just jumping and running about, But I was annoyed by homework that was set by my daughter to write down the rules of hockey. My PE lesson, for crying out loud. So it was because the school had a homework policy and the teachers felt themselves surveyed and watched, and they had to set homework. Parents like homework. We talked before we started recording, that there's a symbolic power to homework. Parents like it. We think it's sometimes we are a good school because there's a lot of homework to do. I'm a good teacher because I set lots of homework. It's a marketing process. The evidence isn't there.
But also those projects that you set, and certainly that I've set in the environment that I've worked in here, when you set kind of a nice project to build or make something or whatever it is to do at home, often it actually becomes a competition between the parents. How much kind of, money and time can we throw at this? I can't look like a bad parent. And that's a weird dynamic that I have had to navigate as well.
So, and here's a comment from a LinkedIn user. I'm not a teacher, but work within schools. Really enjoy these shows. Thank you very much for that. We always like to hear those comments. My daughter's just gone into year 1 and has had homework plus reading since reception. Totally on board with the reading, but with 2 parents working full time and so on, there's very little time to do more reading in the week. She's knackered after school. It's a very technical term, knackered after school. So are teachers. And to be honest, so am I most of the days. At the weekends, we play, spend time outside. Delighted to hear that. I do think homework at such a young age might be a bit much. And I think our panel is inclined to agree with you. And I think the majority of teachers would.
I can add one thought.
John, go ahead, yeah.
Exactly. If you want it. As you go through school, if you design an assessment system where homework is kind of necessary, A levels and GCSEs, and there was revision is kind of important because you have to cram your head full of lots of information that you're going to use for a day or two and forget afterwards. If that's the assessment system, then that's why homework tends to produce academic success or outcomes later on in school. But that's because we've designed the rules of the game to reward those who do homework, not because homework is intrinsically itself valuable.
Yeah. And an interesting comment from another listener and viewer is that there are some WhatsApp groups that parents have set up where they send pictures of their children's projects, and you kind of wonder who's looking for the praise and credit there. On homework, that's all we've time for today. On to our next story. This week, the much respected OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, published a very damning report on education in the UK, especially compared to other countries. Now, let me just list a few highlights here. Primary school classes are among the biggest in the world in the UK, with the average being 27 pupils. Only Chile has bigger classes with 28 on average. The ratio of teachers to pupils is the 5th highest in the world. That's not good. Highest might sound great, but that's actually not good. Spending on early years is among the lowest countries for which there was any data. And we have younger teachers than most countries. And that might sound good, but that does leave an experience gap. And at current rates, 9% of experienced teachers are leaving every year. John, I'm just going to put it to you bluntly. Education has hit the iceberg.
Goodness me, yeah, what a damning report. I mean, it's just eye-wateringly bad, isn't it? I mean, because everything you know about school, that early works well. Sure Start was great. Get the skills in early, establish a good environment for kids, and so on, so on, so on. We all know this. So to read a report that says actually we're doing very badly in the early years in terms of class size. Class size is the one that stands out. That was the headline issue. Does it matter? Is it matter of a big class? I'll give 2 anecdotes. When my daughters, or two girls, when they were at primary school level, they're all grown up now. Anyway, when they were at primary school level, they went off to school able functionally to read. And I was very proud of this, being middle class, very proud of this. Off they went functionally to read. So I didn't worry too much whether they were in the class size. I knew I wouldn't want to teach a big class size, but I was happy they were going to succeed. In 1964, my mother went to the school, in my primary school, and said, my son John can't read. The head teacher said, well, he can read. Of course he can read. I've just checked his assessments. And he said, he's clever. He can convince you he's reading when he's not reading. He can look at pictures. He picks up clues. He diverts the attention. He's very articulate, but he can't actually read. So the head teacher got me out of the classroom, proved I couldn't read. And within 18 months, I had some sort of specific learning sort of thing. Letters were all going in the wrong way round. Anyway, after that was sorted out, I read quite quickly. Big class sizes harm the kids that sit quietly at the backs, silently failing. And that's going to be a disaster. And by the time they get into secondary school, they'll manifest that in poor behaviour, particularly.
Yeah, through frustration and things. Absolutely agree with you. Yeah. Lucy, John has kind of alluded to, the importance of class sizes, but can you just illustrate for our viewers and listeners, what is the importance of class? Why does it matter? And why does teacher ratio matter? And why do early years matter maybe more than anything else?
It's to do with the level of input and attention you're able to give to these children, and there are always going to be those ones that slip under the radar. You cannot, even with a teaching assistant in the room, physically get around every child every lesson. And when you've got a situation where, in theory, every child should be making some kind of progress every single lesson, staying on top of that is a mammoth task. And I do think class sizes are an issue, but I also think number of adults in the room as well. And this is, again, I kind of go into unrealistic mode, but I've seen sort of situations here. There is a school here that has something called the co-teacher model, where there are 2 teachers in the room at any given time. Granted, the class sizes are a little bit smaller, but, is that an unrealistic approach? If you're going to consider keeping these classes in these sizes, then maybe you need to have more adults in the room. But when you have got a retention or recruitment and retention crisis to the magnitude that we do in the UK, I'm daydreaming, that's not really realistic. But yeah, if you're going to insist on that, then there are going to be children that fall by the wayside. There are going to be groups that, have to get on independently. There are going to be situations where you are going to get parents coming to you, and I've had it many times throughout my career, where they're sort of saying, you're paying attention to the wrong groups, you're kind of doing this and you're doing that, because you are trying to spread yourself so thin. It is unrealistic.
Yeah. On a slight tangent, I'm a big fan of team teaching. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Even if you can just do it periodically for a short period with an experienced teacher, if you can work side by side with them, I think it's absolutely worth its weight in gold. Christopher, if we could come to you, how can education be saved?
All the small questions today, Paul. I'm pretty certain it won't be saved with the revenue raised from imposing VAT costs on the delivery of teaching and learning, though. I'm pretty sure about that. I think it's ultimately going to be saved, as we've already said, I think, by decreasing the pupil-to-teacher ratio. My daughter is educated in a small rural primary school, and when she joined, there were 2 other children in her year group, and as parents, we made this choice because we wanted her teachers to really know her and to have the time to invest in her personal development, and we're pretty pleased every day of the week that that's the decision we took. I'd like to see that opportunity for every child. Many of the pedagogical techniques that are currently in fashion, we know would work so much more effectively with a class of 15 than a group of 30. Our ambition should be heading in that direction, and then we can ask the questions about how we pay for it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, yeah. John, do you want to add something?
I was going to say, ask any teacher, and they'll agree with Chris. Clearly, it just makes a complete sense. The smaller the classroom, the more attention. And when I first started teaching in one of my early schools of teaching, this is in the 1980s, I was at a school where they had enough classroom assistants. Let's hear it for classroom assistants. I had at times 2 classroom assistants in my class with me.
Yeah.
And they were older than me and more experienced. It's great.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the case when I finished.
Yeah. Well, I think we're all in agreement. We don't really know what needs to happen, but certainly something needs to happen, and to happen urgently, because that report is very damaging and very bad for the morale of the profession as well. On to our final news story for today. So our final news story for today, and if I could maybe just say very quickly to Leanne, who is in production in the background, I think our titles are mixed up, but we'll not worry too much about that. Our final story is Behaviour Will Get Worse, says a YouGov survey And it makes the following claims, and now we've got the right titles back. Thank you very much, Leanne. 37% of teachers and leaders expect behaviour to be worse this year, with 11% of those teachers and leaders saying they expect it to be much worse. There is an increase in complaints from parents about school behaviour and behaviour policies and the school rules. And we've covered this point before. There is a rise in vexatious complaints that often and quickly become personal and targeted at individuals. Now, behaviour is always a very emotive issue, and we can't hope to do justice to the whole lot of it in the 10 minutes we've got today. But Christopher, if we just focus on a couple of issues, can you help us to understand where this surge in complaints and poor behaviour, where is it coming from? Why is it happening now?
An interesting question as well. I've got to be careful I don't sound too much like Brent here, I think. So it's a troubling poll, and I think it reflects really a mood of pessimism across the profession as much as anything else. We keep seeing these polls from teachers, and it seems that we're being drawn into this kind of doom narrative, which I'd really like us to try and avoid. But certainly, behaviour remains an issue in schools. It always has been, and it always will be, I suspect. The causes, we touched on some of them this morning already. Large industrialised school models, perhaps, are giving children the impression they are less significant than they were 10, 20, 30 years ago. Class sizes are too large, recognition of the individual is limited, and as we've already mentioned, where that's occurring, the struggling and the disaffected can't be meaningfully supported in a huge, great big group. There is a big issue about community decline. So towns and cities within 50 minutes drive of my house have the highest exclusion rates in England, in the northeast, Middlesbrough, Hartlepool, that kind of area. Driving through these communities, you can see little evidence of childhood even being acknowledged at all. They're marked by huge sprawling housing estates that lack playgrounds and recreational spaces. They're located a long bus ride from town on routes that don't have any buses. You do have to ask the question, where is childhood visible in the general social fabric of our society? So questions, I suppose, how do we design our cities and communities to support families in raising children? Because that's what we need to do. How do we deindustrialise our school system? Because I think that's where we're going to see the most benefit most quickly. And how do we help young teachers to embrace their position as crucial community leaders so that we can start changing this doom narrative to something a bit more optimistic and forward-thinking?
Super thoughts, Christopher. Yeah, some fantastic ideas there. If we could just stay with you very briefly, Christopher, what's the role of parents? Do they not need to take much more responsibility in terms of managing the behaviour of their children?
I think it's probably fair to say that parents are the first educators of their children, and I wouldn't like to give them any more advice than that.
Okay. Lucy, and again, you and I have talked about this before. When discipline breaks down in classrooms and schools and so on, there is a personal cost for individual teachers. That chair that gets thrown is thrown at an individual, a human being in a room. And, their flesh, their blood, their feelings, there is a response, there is a reaction. What is the price on teachers' health and well-being when discipline begins to break down?
I mean, you're seeing it in real time. You're seeing it with teachers who try their absolute damnedest to stick with it repeatedly after. And there are those teachers out there who are experiencing daily, almost hourly, abuse. And it sounds dramatic, but you walk into some of these classrooms in various locations around the UK. This isn't concentrated. You know, we're not sort of saying, oh, this region's terrible and this region, you know, has no problems at all. Nah, absolute rubbish. You walk into almost anywhere, and I guarantee you a teacher will tell you, multiple teachers will tell you stories of whether it's verbal, physical, etc. And it's, you know, to go back to kind of an age-old phrase of it takes a village with our children. You know, Chris talking about the fact that at a societal level, this is breaking down. This is not just happening in schools, and this is not just, you know, teachers are getting often I feel getting the brunt of the sort of the blame here and the things like that, because it's, you know, we're not sort of doing things properly in schools. I absolutely respect what Christopher said about, you know, we're not telling you can't as a teacher. That is not your place to tell parents how to raise their children. But I've said it before and I'll say it again, bringing these community schools are centers of community. We need to be bringing people together. And I do think there is a responsibility there to encourage this togetherness again. And we lost it a lot during COVID. You know, there's a lot of distance, and I don't think in a lot of these cases that these communities have healed. And, you know, this is a big job and a big thing. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen over years. There's a lot of development that needs to happen in the wider community. If you're going to sort of look at almost like an ecological model, whether, you know, with kind of schools at the center and building out from there, then that is a big project that needs to happen, really.
Thanks, Lucy. John, Christopher made some wider, brilliant points, you know, issues around town planning and, you know, the social context and so on. And those things all do fit in. But if we could kind of refocus on schools, what can schools do to, you know, improve discipline, to make matters better?
Well, let me first say that, discipline, poor behaviour in school is one of the most awful things a teacher can experience. It's corrosive, it's horrible, it's the nastiest sort of thing. And the schools that adopt will run around in circles, adopting disciplinary policies and different strategies, and they'll get outside consultants in and so on. But as Chris points out, we're getting the schools mirror society. So in a sense, I mean, it's going to sound like I'm saying something hopeless, but it is bigger than simply schools can fix it. And the trouble is with schools, they'll obsess about teachers, they'll blame teachers will blame students, teachers and students other people will blame parents. So we'll pass this blame around when the picture is bigger than that. One of the things that struck me about this article in the Times was the contribution from Michael Wilshaw. And Michael Wilshaw is one of the architects of appalling behaviour, because he is one of those progenitors of these super disciplined schools, the Mossborns and so on. It's that nasty, cultish, self-selecting schools that become a means of humiliating other schools and saying, well, you know, discipline, super discipline, zero tolerance. I've got to disagree very much with a comment that popped up from JBL there. Zero tolerance is a reactionary, disciplinary response to something that's bigger than society. There's a phrase that is in society. There's a phrase that Michael Wilshaw used when he said, well, why can't parents simply teach simple good manners? Simple good manners. What a condescending phrase to use. And I bet he thinks his children have got simple good manners and he teaches them. He bets things all the people around him have simple good manners. But somewhere out there, the lumpen working class in the distance, they don't have simple good manners. It's condescending, it's disciplinary, it's classist, and so on and so on. You can't fix poor behavior by zero tolerance. You can't fix poor behavior by uber discipline. And you can't fix poor behavior by blaming parents. But you will get the schools that you deserve if you live in this kind of atomized society. And if everything in society is rushing in the direction of breaking down communities and family ties and so on, and turning us into a mobile workforce and so forth, then that's what you'll get. In fact, poor behavior in schools is a logical consequence of the kind of world we constructed. I'm afraid you're going to get it. And the teachers we need to bring
everyone back together. So this disconnection is ultimately going to, well, I suppose, yeah, I mean, it's difficult, but then I suppose we're so acutely aware of what the problem is, but no one seems to really be coming up with what we can do. And maybe, you know, these extreme this extreme approach is not the answer, but there's me kind of trying to say, let's bring people back together. And I'm not really sure how to do that either, because I think we are so broken apart at this point. But it needs to start somewhere, and certainly there needs to be greater backing up of teachers in the community as well. And certainly within teacher training, we are being let down as well by, like, you can't teach behavior management in a lecture hall. It has to be something that is done, on the job. We need better mentoring for younger teachers as well. And that certainly is something. I mean, there's lots of things. This is multifaceted, as we've said. But I'm interested to see where it goes next.
Yeah, but let's be optimistic, as Chris said. Forward-thinking and optimistic. That's what you've got to be. And as a society, we're not forward-thinking and optimistic. We're about control and discipline, and we mustn't be. We must be forward-thinking, optimistic. Let's reduce the homework burden. Let's change the assessment process. Let's alter our attitude to the way in which schools become disciplinary filtering systems and make them places of play and childhood. And there's my old hippie coming out again, you see. Again with Lucy.
A long way to go, though. I'm with you.
2 hippies, maybe 3 on the programme. I did say 10 minutes is nowhere near sufficient for this topic. And I'm sure, some of our fellow hosts will pick that story up maybe through the week, and we will have full programmes maybe on that. Just to close on this issue, John, you raised a point there, and I really want to press the 3 of you just for very short, sharp answers on this. Is it not a bit rich, really, to say the least, especially when, former chief inspectors refused to acknowledge their feelings and their poor decisions and so on when they held office? Is it not a bit rich that they comment on educational issues today, and they comment without responsibility, without impunity of any kind, and quite often they comment for profit? They make money out of this. Christopher, what are your thoughts on old chief inspectors commenting on current issues?
I'd prefer them to observe a period of silence.
Very diplomatic. Very diplomatic. John, what about you?
These aren't ideologically neutral people. They come from a particular view of society and a particular view that they are promoting. Will Shaw is not an expert on education. He knows no more about it than anyone else. Who's a damaging influence and should go off to happy retirement.
And I think just to add a thing, in that article that we're referring to, and we'll maybe put it in the show notes, I think he says even more contemptuous and spurious things than what you highlighted there, John. Lucy, old inspectors commenting on current issues and profiting from them, what do you think?
Well, you seem to have a lot of time on your hands. Come wander around. Come have a look.
Do a bit of subbing.
Have a tea. Well, you're here. You want to have a look at what's really going on. Get off your backside and pay us a visit.
Help out with teacher shortage. Absolutely. That's all we have time for on that story today. Back soon with our shows of the week. Lots of great shows this week. As I said to you, teachers are back from their holidays, tanned and all the rest of it. They're getting into routine, and our hosts are coming up with great shows, great ideas, and great guests. Christopher, what have you been listening to this week?
My show of the week is Teaching Primary Writing with Adam Colbeck, in which Adam spoke to the wonderfully named Ollie Cakebread about his experience of teaching writing in primary schools. The show offered lots of perceptive observations on the benefits and challenges that come with teaching from commercially available ready-made schemes, which I think is quite a significant issue in primary schools, and how you might plan for cross-key stage progression while using them. It's really worth a listen.
Great, yeah. John, has anything caught your ear this week?
Yeah, I listened to the Late Show with Ria and Leanne, who's in the background here now. And it was a brilliant discussion. It was a lovely piece of live radio, because there was a nice bit at the beginning, which was kind of a slow start. Leanne had trouble joining the show. And then as the show got on, they built up a kind of momentum. What they were discussing was creativity. And it was a bit like the Ken Robinson famous thing on YouTube years ago, that creativity in schools is undervalued and pushed aside. And they raised some interesting points. I loved the idea that creativity in a class is good for the teachers as much as it is good for the students. In other words, having fun, drawing pictures, playing, visualizing, drama, all these things are, they make they actually setting an art. I never realized before that if you walk into an art lesson, how lovely and calm it can be. You know? And if you're, and that's what you want in school. Pottering along, playing, enjoying is good for mental health of students and for teachers. Creativity. It was a really good discussion. Made me think about the joys of art lessons.
I'll tell you very quickly, I listened to Adam and Brent this week on Education Tonight, and they talked to Tom Benison, an expert in maths teaching. And I have to say, I learned a lot. He made the point there's a big difference between numeracy and maths. Very little maths actually taught, a lot of numeracy. And they talked about regional disparity among, the quality and nature of maths lessons. And something I didn't realise, there is a maths premium, which is £900 per pupil. And A-level maths was the biggest A-level, over 100,000 entrants last year. Very fascinating stuff. And as always, Adam and Brent give balance to their show, and they had Anne Fine, the former Children's Laureate, on, who believes that children should be able to learn online and not necessarily attend school. Great show, well worth a listen. Lucy, anything you've been listening to this week?
Waving the flag for my early years colleagues, who often get neglected and forgotten about, sadly. And Sophie Smith-Tong has been very bravely taking up the mantle here. She's done a few shows in this area, but this one was about leading early years, and she spoke to a friend of hers, Kiara Rush, who leads, she's a children's centre head, and she was talking about not only her pathway into it, which was really interesting because she actually went straight to work at 16 and then went to university a bit later and sort of had a slightly different path into her career to begin with. And then talking about the importance of that, of setting up that foundation of being in the community. I think she's in Islington, I believe, and how that they've worked really hard as a community to have that set up really from young families, from very, very early days all the way through until these children get sent off to infant school or to primary school. And it was a very important listen in terms of curriculum development as well in that area. So I would encourage you, certainly my primary colleagues who maybe sort of avoid the early years discussion a bit, because I know it's an area that's not my area of expertise, so it's sort of a nervous one for me. But I think it's very important to have that understanding for any teacher, but certainly for my primary colleagues out there, a really, really good listen.
Great, thank you very much. 3 great shows. Absolutely fantastic views and viewpoints today. Some brilliant ideas from our guests, Christopher, John, and Lucy. Thank you very much to our sponsors, Future and Careers, and John Catt, and a special mention to Leanne, who is producing in the background and making us look good in a show where nothing ever goes wrong. Have a great week. See you all next Sunday, same time, same place. Bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.